Hello and welcome to the Dumbfounded podcast, where I dig up the weirdest, wildest, and straight up dumbest moments in history. Because apparently, stupidity isn't just a modern thing. I'm Thomas Collins, and every month I try to prove that the past was just as ridiculous as the present. So, with that, let's get dumbfounded. On January 16th, 1919, one Boston's newspaper's headlines would read the following: ensnaring in its sticky flood more than 100 men, women, and children, crushing buildings, teams, automobiles, and streetcars, and everything in its path. The reeking mass slapped against the side of buildings and then swished back into the harbor. The day before, the Purity Distilling Company's tank of molasses exploded and sent a 25-foot wave into the Boston streets. This is the Great Molasses Flood. So imagine for a second. It's January 15th, 1919 in Boston's North End. You're strolling the cobblestone streets, and maybe you're heading to lunch. And suddenly, you hear a roar, a rumble like a freight train, or maybe even a thunderclap. And before you know it, you're swept off your feet by a 25-foot wave of molasses. So that's no joke. A 2.3 million gallon storage tank filled with molasses burst open. That was about 13,000 tons of the sticky stuff rushing through the streets at about 35 miles per hour. So the results? 21 people were killed, 150 were injured, buildings were destroyed, horses were swept away, and the city that smelled like pancake syrup for decades. So what caused it? A little background. The tank was owned by the Purity Distilling Company, and it was about 50 foot tall and about 90 feet wide. It held molasses used to make ethanol, for booze, and during wartime explosives. Here was the problem. The tank was built poorly, and it was never properly tested. The steel was too thin and too brittle, and to top it off, the treasurer in charge had zero engineering experience. And people had been complaining for years that the tank had already been leaking. The company just painted it brown to hide the molasses oozing out. Add some temperature whiplash, from freezing cold to 40 degrees Fahrenheit in one day, and boom. You have a tank explosion. Witnesses described the scene as a 25-foot high wave of molasses that was crashing through Boston's North End. Buildings were torn from their foundations. A streetcar was nearly knocked off its tracks. Horses struggled like flies on flypaper. People suffocated, crashed, or drowned. One child, Anthony DeStasio, was carried through the streets by the wave, passed out, and woke up to find his sisters looking down at him. After the initial wave, the molasses cooled and thickened, turning the rescue into a nightmare. Victims were so glazed in the syrup that they were hard to recognize, and some were found months later, washed into the harbor. After the wave had settled, the city attempted to clean up. Using saltwater sand and a lot of elbow grease, hundreds of workers spent weeks cleaning the immediate area. The molasses was so thick that it tracked through the city for months onto streetcars, subway seats, payphones, and even into people's homes. One report said everything that a Bostonian touched was sticky. Rescuers and cadets from the USS Nantucket were the first on the scene, wading through molasses to help survivors. The molasses was about 2 foot tall, I believe, so they would have been up to their, knees or waist, depending on their size. Nurses from the Red Cross dove in, and the response was heroic, but slow. So naturally, after all the cleanup, people wanted answers. The owners tried to pass the blame, claiming that anarchists blew up the tank. But 3 years of hearings found that the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, who was the parent company of the Purity Distilling Company, at fault. The lawsuit became the first major class action suit in Massachusetts history. This led to better construction, regulations, and oversight. So the next time they built a 2.3 million gallon tank, they had actual engineers on the site. The United States Alcohol Company paid out about $628,000, which is roughly $11.4 million in today's money. The victims' families received about $7,000 each, which is a modest sum for such a horrific loss. So today, Langstone Park stands where the tank once loomed. There's a plaque, and on the 100th anniversary in 2019, they even marked the tank's foundation using ground-penetrating radar. And yes, for decades afterwards, Bostonians said that the North End smelled like molasses on hot days. Also, Harvard researchers recreated the flood using corn syrup and physics simulations, and it turns out, yes, it could really move as fast as it was going. So what did we learn? Don't cheap out on giant industrial tanks. Don't ignore leaks. And maybe, Molasses isn't that slow. Well, that wraps up another episode of the Dumbfounded podcast, where history proves that being dumb is absolutely timeless. If you laughed, learned something, or just feel slightly smarter by comparison, do me a solid and follow the show. Leave us a review. It really helps history nerds find me. And honestly, I crave the validation. If you have an idea for a show topic, please leave it in the comments. Until next time, guys, stay dumbfounded.